Hey friends, it's Corey from Hey Let's Make Stuff. Thank you so much for joining me for this next Illustrator tutorial. This video is number 5 in my series of video tutorials for SVG design, so if you're interested in making your own Cricut or Silhouette files, you're in the right place. Each of these videos builds on the last, so if you're here but you haven't watched the other videos, I highly recommend starting from the beginning so you're not lost. Today we're going to be talking about color and swatches in Illustrator. Color feels like it should be pretty straightforward. You make an image a certain color and that's it. But colors can also help you with how you want to actually cut your files on the mat. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about how to create a color palette and a few other things. I think you're going to enjoy it, so let's dive in. Today's video is going to be quite a bit shorter than last week's. We went through a lot last week. I think the video was about 30 minutes. I'm guessing this one will be quite a bit shorter. So I hope this gives your mind a little bit of a break from all of these longer lessons, but color is really important, so let's dive in. Like with so many things in Illustrator, there are many ways to work with color. My preference is to use a combination of the color tools up here in the control panel in the upper left, as well as down here in the toolbar over here on the left as well. You can also work with colors in the Swatches panel. I just don't tend to work here, but it is another common place that people work with color. This Swatches panel is very similar to these drop downs up here in the control panel. Colors in Illustrator are called swatches, and each colored box represents a color swatch. If you want to do any additional learning about colors within Adobe Illustrator, I would highly recommend searching for color swatches and not just the word color. If you search for color, you're going to get a lot of people who are trying to do coloring things like coloring pages and coloring artwork. But if you search for swatches, you are much more likely to get working with colors in Illustrator. Let's start with drawing that trusty circle on our artboard. We've used this several times. The keyboard shortcut to choose the circle tool is L, and then I'm going to go ahead and just draw my circle. You'll notice that the default coloring of a shape in Illustrator is a white fill, meaning it's white on the inside, with a 1-point black stroke. So you can see that up here in the control panel, I have white as my fill, and I've got black as my stroke, and here it says my stroke is 1 point. And then down here in the toolbar, you can see that my fill is white and my stroke is black. Generally, for SVG files, I recommend using an empty stroke, meaning no stroke, especially for beginners. There are times when I will use a stroke and I will need to sort of outline the stroke, and I will go into doing that in a later video. But for this video, we are going to use an empty stroke because it really is much more easy to make an SVG file that way than to make one with a stroke. So let's select our circle. The selection tool is V. I want to make sure I have it selected. And up here, I can go and change my colors. So I'm going to make the interior of my circle teal. And then I'm going to make my stroke empty or none. It's this little red line through the white box. So that it will remove my stroke. And now if I click off, you can see that I have a teal circle with no stroke. At its most basic, that is how to change color in Illustrator. You can also double click on the swatches in the toolbar, and that will open up the color picker. Now you can see here that I have this color selected, but if I change my color, like I say I wanted a lighter color, in this box here, it will compare the color you started with to the new color. It's just very helpful to see if you're getting closer to what you're looking for. You can also input HSB values, RGB values, hex code, or CMYK. We'll go into making a color palette later in this lesson, and for that I often use these hex codes. They are just 6-digit identifiers for different colors. You can find hex code charts online, but I find that that is the easiest way to select colors in Illustrator. Let's go back up and look at these swatches. So these are the default swatches in Adobe Illustrator. There is a wide range of color swatches here, and if you'd like to stick with these, that's totally fine. You can also click the swatch library menu, and here you can choose other types of swatches. So let's say I wanted to go to color properties and bright. This here would open up a color panel with a bunch of different bright color palettes that you could choose from. So these are sort of coordinating. You may want to choose one of these as your color palettes. You can search up here through all of these different palettes, see if you find one you like. Next up, let's talk about creating a color palette. So I'm not going to go into how to actually, the color theory behind creating a color palette or anything like that, but I do have a couple resources if you would like more information on how to create a color palette. The first is that I actually have a course called Crafting Your Signature Style, and this is all about visual branding for small businesses. And one of the things that it goes through is how to create a color palette. Plus it comes with a whole bunch of sample color palettes. Canva also has a color palette generator that you can play with. That's a lot of fun. You can create color palettes from photos and other images. Or like I originally did, I knew that I wanted sort of a full rainbow. So I just started playing around with the color picker over here. Remember, you can double click on this over here to get this color picker. I just started playing around with colors until I had 8 colors I really liked. Because I designed SVG files, I wanted basically an entire rainbow. I am not a huge fan of the colors orange or purple, so I didn't include them in my base palette here. But in addition to this color palette, sometimes I will bring in something like orange for Halloween, some shades of brown for fall, but generally I stick to these 8 colors. You can have as many or as few colors as you like, but if you are designing for SVGs, I would recommend picking actually a larger palette than you might have just for your brand. That just gives you a little bit more flexibility in the colors you can use in your SVGs. This doesn't really matter if you're designing for yourself, so you can probably just skip this step, but if you do want to start a shop or start sharing your SVGs in some way, I would suggest creating a color palette just because then everything will look cohesive. I will go ahead and link to my shop in the description, and you can see there that these are basically the colors that I use over and over again, and it gives my shop a nice cohesive feel. Once you have all the colors in your palette, I would recommend creating a color palette like this. Make a bunch of small circles and then color each circle the color that you have in your palette. Before we turn this into a color palette, I want to remove the default swatches. So I'm going to go up here to that swatch dropdown, and I'm going to click on basically everything except for those black and white swatches up here at the top. I like to keep the black and white there just because it's easy to access those when I'm creating SVGs. And then I'm going to hit this trash can. Now you might be thinking, oh no, I don't want to get rid of all my default swatches, but this actually won't. This is just deleting them from this document. Next time you go to open up Illustrator, they will all be there. You don't have to worry. So I'm going to go ahead and click this little trash can, and that's going to delete our swatches. Then I'm going to take my selection tool, that's keyboard shortcut V, and I'm going to drag and select all of my circles. Then I'm going to go back to that same color swatch dropdown, and I'm going to go to new color group. It looks like a little folder here. When I click on new color group, I can give it a name. So I'm going to give this HLMS, Hey Let's Make Stuff 2024. And I want to have selected artwork selected here. I'm going to click OK. Now you'll see up here that we have all of our swatches basically in these colors up in this dropdown. It's also in the stroke dropdown, so it's in both the fill and the stroke. Now I'm going to save this file. That's Command S on a Mac or Control S on a PC. And for this one, I'm just going to call it my blog palette. Now, if I open up this particular document again, I will see this same palette. This palette is specific to this document. But if you want to use this palette across many documents, we can actually create a custom palette that you can access in more than just one document. So again, we're going to go to that swatch dropdown, and I'm going to select all the colors from white to pink here, just so I have everything selected. Then I'm going to hit that swatch library dropdown once again, and I'm going to go to save swatches here at the top. Again, I can give it another name here. I'm going to call it HLMS 2024. I'm going to save over the file I actually already have. And this looks the same, but if I go to that swatches library again, and I go down to user defined, I can choose that palette. Now this palette is available in any document you want to open up. So basically I always have this open. You can put it in your panels. I actually tend to just drag it and sort of keep it up here in the top left of my screen because I want it always open. I don't want to have to keep closing and opening it with the other panels. But if you have a smaller screen, you may need to put it over here in the panels to kind of save yourself some room. And that's how you create a color palette. Next, let's talk about using color to delineate your cut layers. Now, this is very specific to SVG file design. You won't find this in other types of design necessarily, but I find that using color to delineate your layers is really helpful. If you'll remember back from our How to Make an SVG from a Font tutorial, I talked about making a compound path. So I have made this entire SVG design one compound path, which means that it is going to cut as one piece. I'm going to open up that layers panel, and you can see here that underneath my layer, I have a single compound path. But when you're creating an SVG, I want you to think about the best way to cut it. Many SVG designers will just make a single color SVG with a single compound path. Like I said, this is an example. We have Create Your Own Sunshine and the sunshine. I mean, it's kind of cute, but honestly, that black sun is a little depressing to me. So yes, you could use your cutting machine software to sort of split this into pieces. On a Cricut, you would use Contour, for example, but that's a lot of work. And I feel like making it more flexible when you design it is just a better way to go. For some SVGs, a single layer totally works. Like this kitchen monogram file here, you're meant to actually like put somebody's name in there in the cutting machine software. It works really well as a single cut file. I could have designed this with a bunch of different colors for all of these utensils, but I wanted this to be sort of a quick SVG that somebody could easily put on an apron for a gift. So it's a single compound path, single cut file, single color, really easy to make. But let's go back to that sun SVG. This SVG is so much more successful if I designed it with the sun as a separate compound path. So I'm going to go back over here to the layers panel, and you'll see that I have a compound path that has the black, and I have a compound path that has the yellow. Our layer here has two compound paths. This gives the crafter so much more flexibility when cutting their file. So maybe they want to cut the words out of black and the sun out of like a gold glitter, or the words they want to cut in pink and they want to use like a shimmery yellow for the sun. This just gives people more flexibility. You could even design this file using 3 separate compound paths to give people even more flexibility. So you can see over here in the layers panel, I have 3 compound paths. My black is a compound path, my yellow is a compound path, and this dark pink is a compound path. You can, of course, design your files however you'd like. If you're designing them for personal use, then definitely just design with them with the materials that you're going to use for your project. But if you're planning on selling or sharing your files, I would keep in mind how buyers may want to cut your files. I think providing some flexibility is a good idea. And technically, you could make each of these compound paths the same color. I could change this to black as well, and I could change sunshine to black as well. And I have 3 compound paths that are all black, but they are separate. I've found that not only does it help sort of delineate those layers visually, but coloring your SVG files just makes them really cute overall, and they stand out a lot better in a sea of just a lot of black options. While those instructions will work really well for cutting machines, if you're planning to use your files for a laser or you want people to be able to cut your files on a laser, you may want to take one additional step. I have found that the Glowforge in particular has issues separating out the different layers so that you can set those layers to cut, score, or engrave. Sometimes it just doesn't let you separate things and it's really annoying. So for laser machines in particular, I like to make each of my compound path its own layer. This is easy to do over here in the layers panel. You're going to start by creating a new layer. It's this little plus sign, and you'll see here that we have layer 2, and I'm just going to drag one of my compound paths into layer 2. And then I'm going to click that arrow, and you can see that that compound path is now under layer 2. I'm going to create a third layer, and then I'm going to drag my other compound path to the third layer. So now you can see that each of my layers has its own compound path. And you'll remember from one of the earlier lessons that you can go in here and change these. So I could name this sun, and that actually will come into your cutting software, not all cutting software, but it'll come into like Cricut Design Space. And that's really handy as well, just to sort of, again, delineate those layers. Now you have all of these compound paths on their own layers, and when you bring this file into a laser software, the software will have an easier time letting you select the line type, that cut, score, or engrave for each layer. Finally, let's talk about layered images. This doesn't have to do so much with color, but I wasn't actually sure where to put it in this whole tutorial series, but I did want to make a note of it. So the last file that we did, that sunshine file, none of the letters overlapped. But maybe you want to create sort of a retro file that looks like this. This has these 3 words, raise them kind, and then this sort of offset shape behind it. If you like the look of this, don't worry, I will be getting to this in an upcoming tutorial, so stay tuned for that one. But I want you to think about how this is cut. So I'm going to zoom out here. On a Mac, that's Command minus. On a PC, it's Control minus. And then I'm going to select raise them and kind and move them over here just a little bit. Now you can see that I have a single black image behind the words. Now another option would be if I selected the words and I moved them here, and we had the cutout of it. Now I did this by using this minus tool here, but I wanted to show you this as an example. If you cut it out like this and somebody wants to make this file, they won't be layering their project, right? They will be sort of nesting it inside. So if maybe we're using HTV, you have this black layer, and then each of these letters sort of sits inside these sort of puzzle pieces. But personally, I think keeping that solid black option is better because once again, it offers more flexibility. You can easily use it with cardstock, so you can cut that piece out and then you can cut these letters out and glue them on. You can layer your vinyl or your HTV, so you have an actual 2 layers here, a black layer and then your colored layers. Or you can use like a slice and set method, which will create that outline that we were looking at using the minus tool within your cutting software. I will go ahead and link to how to do that in Cricut Design Space, but I'm sure there are ways to do that in other cutting software as well. But keeping it black gives them the most flexibility. So when in doubt, just think about the flexibility of the file. What's the option that will allow people to use your files more easily in more types of projects? There are other ways to use color in Adobe Illustrator called appearances. So some of those would be using a gradient or using a transparency or opacity. But if you use these tools in your cut files, your cutting software will actually strip away that appearance and you'll be left with a solid color for your image. And that's because your cutting software doesn't know what to do with a gradient, right? It just doesn't know. And so it will basically revert it back to being just a solid color. So while I do use these tools quite a bit when I'm making sublimation images and printables and other files, I won't be covering them just because they are really not that applicable to SVG design. All right, that was my overview of colors and swatches in Illustrator. I hope you found it helpful. Next, we're going to actually start drawing images. So we've used fonts and colors, but we're going to start making simple images and illustrations out of shapes next week, and I'm really excited about it. If you have any questions about anything you learned in this tutorial, please leave those in the comments and I will do my best to help. As always, if you found this video helpful, I would really appreciate a like. Subscribe to my channel for more Illustrator, Cricut, sublimation, and laser content. I'll see you next week.